Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. Um, we are very excited to start this webinar series with you all. Um, if you have any Q&A, there is a Q&A section, so feel free to drop in your questions. We will respond to those questions as they come up. But please do not hesitate if you have any comments, feedback, or questions. Please feel free to use the Q&A sections to drop your comments. So with that, let's get started. Today's topic is talking about some key planning areas for Microsoft Teams voice deployment. Um, Obviously, we're not going to cover everything that's involved in the Teams planning a Teams voice rollout, but we will definitely cover some key areas that we need to be mindful of and plan properly when it comes to deploying Microsoft Teams phone system. Here's the agenda for today's session. We're going to do a quick introduction. We're going to discuss why it's important to do planning, even though it may seem like it's a no-brainer, but there are areas and things that we want to be mindful of in terms of planning. We are going to take a look at how Microsoft Teams connects, right? We're going to take a step back, understand the fundamentals of how it connects. That's going to help us plan better for the rollout. And then we are going to talk about some connectivity elements, which is critical for Teams Phone, bandwidth planning, and then telephony assessment, and talk about some user adoption strategy. At the end, we're going to do Q&A, but like I said earlier, if you have any questions pop up, please feel free to drop it in the Q&A section. So let's start introduction. Who am I? So my name is Satyendra Sharma. I am a principal architect with Netrix Global. I've been with Netrix for over 7 years now, and I love my job. It's very challenging. I get to work with a lot of new clients. Every customer has their unique challenges, so it kind of keeps my job very entertaining. I have over 15 years of experience in the infrastructure world. I started my career doing Exchange servers deployment. So I've started working on Exchange 2003 until Exchange Online, and then I pivoted to real-time communications. And my first platform that I worked on was Office Communication Server 2000. So if anybody out there has worked on the OCS servers, you know how fun it was to work on those platforms. But then from that, we started doing link deployment, Skype deployment, and here we are talking about Microsoft Teams. I live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I have an awesome family. I have 2 young kids under the age of 2, so keep my life a little entertaining at home, and we've got a crazy dog. So from a work perspective, what I like to do is I like to modernize communication landscape for clients and help solve business challenges. That's the part that I love doing. Communication collaboration there is so much involved, so I love helping clients choose the right path and then solve their business problems that everybody's after and increase productivity with that. So let's talk about importance of planning. I have 2 examples to share with you all today. But before I get to those examples, I just want to talk about why the planning is important. So if you are a organization moving from a traditional phone system, right? If you have an Avaya system or Mitel or Cisco's and stuff like that, the one thing to be aware of is these systems are premise-based deployment. They're all sitting inside of your data center, in your data closet, and you have a dedicated network, right? All your voice traffic is running on a dedicated network. That is why we don't have any interference with other workloads that are happening in the organization. So when we talk about moving to a platform like Microsoft Teams, now you are putting your voice traffic on your data network, which is what is used for everything else, right? So you have your email, your file transfers, all kinds of stuff happening on your data network, and now you're putting voice on it. That is why the planning becomes crucial, so that we don't affect the voice workload when we are leveraging an existing, already utilized network, right? Because we no longer have the flexibility to have a dedicated network just for voice, right? So that's why importance of planning is. The two case studies I want to talk about is with the proper planning ahead of time. Before I get to the details, um, a lot of the times it may seem planning is a no-brainer, but it oftentimes gets overlooked or not done properly, or people take shortcuts to get to the project. Maybe there's a time crunch, there is a budget crunch, there could be many reasons. But with proper planning, what we were able to do in these two use cases or case studies is we did the proper planning, we took the time to understand where the client is moving from, created a solution accordingly, did a proper pilot, did testing, validation, and that allowed us to expedite the migration because there were no surprises that typically pops up if you don't do your planning properly, right? So with that, we were able to finish the projects 6 months ahead of time. And then during the deployment, we also discovered that there were certain things and devices that we had accounted for that were really not needed. So that resulted into a pretty good savings on the budget that everybody loves. Also, user adoption is critical. Uh, in some cases, you may say user adoption is actually more important than technology, right? Because we can deploy any technology we want, but if the users are not utilizing it, then it's no good. So, with the proper user adoption planning, content creation, training exercise, ongoing training, on-demand training, we are also able to achieve a pretty high rate of user adoption. Similarly, we had a different project for a financial services client. Similar outcome. The project was finished. The scale was different. That's why the timelines are different. But we were able to finish the project ahead of time, under budget, with a higher user adoption rate. Right. So just wanted to kind of set the stage on why this is important. Also, this is another view to understand the dependency or importance of planning. So the bottom, the infrastructure and connectivity is what we are focused on today, right? If we don't plan properly at that layer, your direct impact is going to be end users, and they're not going to use the tool, which we don't want, right? The technology here is Microsoft Teams, as we're talking about, but this kind of puts the context in a visual, right? Just so understanding on how critical a planning is for solutions like Teams Phone. So what happens if we don't have a planned phone deployment from an end user perspective, right? So here in this example, if everything is working fine, the user is having a really good experience. This user here is able to make calls, receive calls. There is no issues in terms of call drops. The screen sharing is working properly. The screen shares are not dropping when she has to do the sharing. Her video is crystal clear. There is no blurry, stuff like that. The user is happy. She's focused. She's productive. She loves the tool. Now, conversely, a side effect of a bad planning or no planning would result into the following, right? Bad user experience. Her calls are not connecting. Her video is dropping. Her screen sharing is dropping. She's distracted, not productive, and she's unhappy with the product, which is what we don't want, right? So this is a side effect, potential side effect of not planning your team's phone deployment properly. And then the other thing that we also see in the industry is when we have bad user experience, oftentimes what happens is people go ahead and they may use a third-party tool, right, on their own. So us as IT leaders, we don't want that to happen. We want a corporate tool that should work properly. Everybody should be using that, and we don't want to introduce third-party systems in the organization, which is not managed, not governed, all kinds of problems with it. So switching back to Teams connectivity, right? And this is where we're going to take a step back to understand how the technology actually connects which will help you plan the deployment properly. So Microsoft Global Network, Microsoft Teams is obviously part of the Microsoft infrastructure running out of Microsoft's massive network. Some stats over here. So Microsoft is number 2 largest network in the world. They own a ton of fiber, dark fiber, under ocean fiber, things like that. Thousands and thousands of miles of private connectivity connecting multiple data centers across different geography, redundant connections, and so on and so forth. The other thing Microsoft also does is they do ISP peering, right? So as internet service providers, Microsoft is partnering with them to make sure a traffic for Microsoft destined is expedited on their network. It's not like QoS, but it's an expedited route, which means an ISP, a peered ISP, will take the shortest path to get to the Microsoft network, eliminating extra hops and make the connection quickly. Internally, inside of the Microsoft network, an audio traffic has priority. So again, in our best interest to get on the Microsoft network as fast as possible. There is an express route option available for enterprises who want to establish private connectivity directly into Microsoft backbone. A little fun fact here, the Microsoft network is as long as it can go back and forth to the moon 3 times. It's a fun fact in case comes up in a trivia somewhere. So with the understanding of Microsoft Network, let's talk about Microsoft Teams as a client. So Microsoft Teams as a client is essentially broken down into 2 parts, right? Or I like to break it down in 2 parts. There is a signaling side of it, and then there is a media side of it. So signaling is the connectivity, how the Microsoft clients discovers and connects to Microsoft Cloud, right? And that happens over TCP port 443. The TCP port 80 is essentially a redirect to TCP 443. It's an HTTPS-based REST API interface. That's how the client connects. It finds their, does all their discovery protocol, connects, does the authentication, authorization, and the users are logged into the client. Now, when the users are logged in, then the media comes into the play, right? So, and the media happens in different modality. So if somebody makes a one-to-one call, if somebody makes a group call, if somebody is doing a media, screen sharing, video calling, so on and so forth. So these media traffic go to Microsoft network from the client on a UDP port, preferably on the UDP port. And there is a link in the page over here, the IP URL link. It's a very good article with a ton of information on what are the Microsoft networks designated for what workload, right? So what we want to make sure from a connectivity standpoint that our clients are able to connect to the designated Microsoft destination IP ranges on UDP ports, right? There is a TCP failback option available in case the UDP is not allowed. However, we want to try to eliminate the TCP route. Why? Because when it comes to media, UDP is your friend, right? TCP is a stateful protocol. Every packet that gets transmitted requires a acknowledgement, right? So you can imagine if you throw 10 packets, goes from point A to point B, the point A is going to need 10 acknowledgement to make sure all the packets are delivered. If a packet is lost in transmit, then all the subsequent packets are delayed and everything is retransmitted, right? So we don't want that for media. We want everything to just go on the network, i.e. UDP, stateless protocol, does not require acknowledgement. The packets are sent on the network, it arrives on the other side. If there is a few packets lost, generally it's not a big deal as long as the loss is within reasonable boundaries, right? So the term we use is fire and forget. So we just throw everything on the network to the right destination, and the packets arrive in the order it was transmitted. So with that, how we can do, right? What can we do to make sure our networks are optimized for Microsoft Teams connectivity? So here is an example. A traditional network, when it comes to connectivity, or consists of three elements, right? So we've got the corporate side of it on the left side, which is your managed network. You have full control, your private, WAN, up until the egress point. And then we have this internet in the mix, right? So everything leaves your corporate network, goes out to the internet, and then off the internet, we connect to the Microsoft network. So corporate network, you have full control, you manage it. Internet, very limited control. We essentially have no control on it. We are on the mercy of ISP to maintain that internet circuits. Usually higher bandwidth, right? Usually a ton of bandwidth on the internet for a lower cost because it's not a private network. On the Microsoft side, as we discussed earlier, it's a Microsoft maintained high bandwidth, no jitter, no packet loss network. So ultra fast network, inside of Microsoft, connected across the region by Microsoft network. What we want to do is do this, right? So the corporate network is not going to go away. You're going to have your WAN, you're going to have your private internal connections, managed network. What we can do is minimize that, expedite the connections to Microsoft Teams to go out on the internet and Microsoft network as fast as possible. And how we can do it, we're going to talk about it more in the future slides. But essentially, we want to reduce the corporate side of the network possible, right? Or wherever possible. Let the client, we don't need to backhaul traffic like traditional network. Traditional network with hub and spoke design are not optimized for cloud-based connectivity. The security, one thing that keeps coming up, that we are going to lose control on the network. The notion of security has shifted. In the older network and older technology, everything was deployed on premises. You are in control of everything. Everything is firewalled off. Now with cloud, the security is shifted from the network boundary to endpoints that users use and the data the users have access to and how we connect. So no longer we need to have the same mindset as the traditional network. Also, there are some performance requirements, right? So these are guidelines that we want to maintain. So from any endpoint in your environment, we want to have low latency, round trip time of 100 milliseconds. That's the amount of time we expect a packet to leave the endpoint, go to Microsoft Cloud, and come back to that endpoint, right? So that's a round trip. The packet loss is, what it is, packet loss. We can sustain some packet loss. We want to keep it under 1% for every 15-second interval. If we have higher packet loss, that's when we start to see experiences where a video freezes, a audio drops, we don't hear anything, and then sometimes it kind of catches up quickly, or people just get disconnected, right? Um, the jitter time is the same thing, but just like in a different jitter buffer. The packet reorder is how the packets are transmitted and how it's arrived. We can sustain certain reorder percentage, but not a ton. So that's the threshold we want to try to maintain. And there are tools we can use to test it, right? Like people be like, we have the recommendation. How do we make sure we are hitting the recommendation? So there are tools available that we can help with to test your network, not just wireless, but also wired network. So anytime we do any kind of testing, we want to make sure we are testing both sides of the network, because more and more users are using wireless network, right? And here is one tool. So if you haven't seen this already, it's available in the public internet, connectivity.office.com. Go to the URL. It will do a DNS discovery, right? So this is correlates to this reducing the corporate leg of the network. So this will tell you what is your DNS server, where your client is pointing to when it connects to Microsoft network, right? Microsoft has those green bubbles you see on the chart is essentially the front door service of Microsoft. So these are the connection points that a client can connect to based on their geography and proximity to the edge servers. And it all happens using Anycast, right? So anytime a connection goes to Microsoft Cloud, the Microsoft Cloud sees what is your source IP, and your client gets redirected to the closest edge location for optimal connectivity. So if we are doing a DNS lookup backhaul, that's not going to take you to a local endpoint, right? So we need to make sure we are doing a local DNS resolution. The clients are allowed to go locally, um, and then connect to the closest entry point for them. There is also an advanced testing that this tool does. It downloads a small exe, it runs it, and then it performs the media and packet loss. It doesn't give you a ton of information about like what IP, what port, protocol, stuff like that, but it gives you enough information to tell you that, hey, we are able to connect, and here is the result of it, right? There are advanced tools available that we can help with, that we're going to talk about towards the end. Plan for bandwidth, like the topic suggests, make sure you plan for your bandwidth, right? Your workload is shifting. The Office 365 or Microsoft Teams is not in your data centers. So your load on your WAN, your internet is going to change. And there is a tool for it, Bandwidth Planner, available. This is accessible within your Teams admin center or your 365 admin center. All you have to do is go to the planner, create a plan for your company, define your office locations and how many users, what kind of internet connection they have. If you are using telephony in Teams, what is that option, right? If it is direct routing, calling plan, operator connect, you select those appropriate option and run through the test. There is also personas that you have to define. So you define your network topology, then you define the personas, like how many users are going to use what workload, right? So audio, video, screen sharing, so on and so forth. So you can fine tune exactly what you are going to allow in your environment so the personas are aligned. And then you add your network size. So this is exactly what it says. And this is where you would define your WAN bandwidth, your internet bandwidth. So on the bottom right corner is the final output of it, right? So I've got Chicago, Milwaukee, Seattle office, the number of users at each locations, and then the planning status was completed. That means I have supplied all the information required by the tool to do the bandwidth planning. Once the sites are created, once the personas are defined, once the users are allocated to the right personas, you can execute the test and it spits out results in these two visual format, right? I personally like the top right corner because I think it gives me the most information. But you can see here, right? So given, for example, the Milwaukee office, the WAN circuit is going to be a problem because that office does not have a local internet breakout. So everything is going to ride on the WAN, and given the personas and the user quantity I have for that location, that bandwidth on that WAN leg is going to be a problem. And typically, the video is the higher bandwidth consuming workload, right? So Teams is very adaptive when it comes to bandwidth. So the more bandwidth is available, the higher resolution is going to try to use for your video feed to give clear pictures and video feed for the attendees. So another tool, it's available to everybody. Go ahead and run it. That way you are eliminating any kind of surprises that may come up when we do your Teams rollout. There is also a pretty good article from Microsoft that talks about required bandwidth. So different kind of workflow. If you're doing one-to-one call, meeting, together mode, and if you're doing audio, video, stuff like that, there is a projected bandwidth available online that you should consider, and then put that into your calculation, right? And in the bottom corner, we have the allowed bandwidth. So this is comes into the play if you have any kind of bandwidth reservation on your internal managed network. So if you are prioritizing audio traffic using QoS and you have certain percentage of your network allocated, so you can manipulate the number and rerun the report. I typically run it with zero bandwidth, just assuming the worst case scenario, and then you work with your network team and see what kind of reservation they have deployed, adjust the number, and rerun the tool. Some of the other areas to optimize your network is obviously whitelist all the IP URLs that is available. If you have any security scanning devices, it doesn't typically work well with Microsoft traffic. Local internet egress, right? Don't do hub and spoke. Have your each site go out locally. Make sure the DNS resolution is also happening locally, so we are not presenting an incorrect address when the connection goes to Microsoft front door, because that's what it looks at to get you redirected to the closest entry point. Allow UDP, big deal, right? Like we want to make sure UDP is allowed for an optimal media connectivity. TCP is gonna, it may work, but you're gonna have a lot of issues with TCP. VPN, pretty hot topic with a lot of clients, right? So if you have any kind of VPN solution deployed in your environment for remote users, by default, all the traffic from that remote endpoint goes over the VPN tunnel, right? That's the whole concept. You put everything in the tunnel, comes to your headquarters where your local resources are, your file servers, stuff like that. But there is a configuration for VPN, known as split VPN, where we can split the traffic from the tunnel and then have that endpoint use local internet to go out to Microsoft, right? Because that obviously Teams is not deployed in your data center. So we want to have that endpoint connect locally, leveraging the split VPN configuration. There is a ton of documentation available depending upon what VPN vendor you are using. Most likely, you have a configuration guide available that talks about how to optimize it. So work with your vendors, work with your VPN networking resources, make sure the split VPN is deployed. And QoS, quality of service only comes into play on your managed network. It's not going to be applicable on the internet. But if you do have QoS, make sure it's deployed properly. Make sure it's deployed on all the network segment. It's not done halfway, right? Because it's not the half QoS doesn't work. Couple of things from a Wi-Fi standpoint, and I have this here because the wireless usage is increasing more and more, right? We have a lot of customers. They're opening these new office locations that is all wireless, collaboration bar. People are hanging out and then walking around with their laptop, supposed to increase productivity and collaboration. So make sure your Wi-Fi is designed properly to allow Teams communication, right? We don't want the Wi-Fi to become a bottleneck because we are all focused on the wired network. Look at the heat maps and coverage. Typically you can upload a floor plan into your wireless environment, and that will show you all the heat map on the coverage. Band steering, move everybody to 5 gigs wherever possible, and just look for any interference and overlap. And there's all kinds of situations, like what kind of headsets are deployed. If it's like a congested area where there is a lot of people using Bluetooth headsets, that may interfere, or you have a kitchen nearby with microwaves and stuff like that, that may also interfere. So do your planning properly for wireless. There's also an option for the roaming aggressiveness on the PCs. So, and this is a setting that is on your wireless network adapter that controls how sticky it is going to be to an access point. So as you're moving around physically, the laptop will bounce from access point to access point. So how aggressive we want it to be. We don't want it to be too loose. We don't want it to be too sticky. So there is a happy medium that we should plan for. All right. So with the networking things planned properly, now we also have to do a telephony assessment on what is actually moving from a telephony standpoint into Microsoft Teams. So take some time to do the assessment, right? Because some of the systems may be deployed 10, 20, 30 years ago. Those people may be around, they may not be around. Definitely, they're not going to remember exactly everything that was deployed. So we need to make sure we are doing a good assessment of what is deployed, what's moving, what's needed, what's not needed, so on and so forth. So what workloads are deployed? Are you using unified communications only? Do you have unified communications in contact center? And if it is a contact center, what components are deployed in contact centers and how does that translate into Microsoft Teams? How many PSTN carriers are involved, right? Do they have telephony offering for Teams or not? Do you need to port numbers? What is your utilization on the PSTN side? How many calls you're making, inbound, outbound, toll-free, concurrent call path? Um, how many phone numbers do you have? You can typically request a CSR from your provider that will list all the phone numbers you have so you can account for what do I need to move and how much do I want to keep in spare and how much can I discard, right? If you have thousands and thousands of phone numbers that may not be used anytime soon, do we really want to keep it? Um, Call flows, right? Delegation, hunt groups, how many endpoints are deployed, what kinds of phones are deployed, how many common area systems are deployed, what are we doing for rooms? Are the rooms for meeting only, or do they also have a telephony access? The integration item is oftentimes gets neglected, but it's pretty important, right? So we run into this all the time where we do an assessment and there's analog systems deployed. There is everybody's favorite fax machines are running, right? Like, what do you do with that? Do you have paging systems? Do you have different zones for paging? Or do you have an amplifier that's hooked up to your phone system today? Like, how do you translate that into the Microsoft Teams world? Or any kind of third party intercom, doorbell, night bell, all kinds of situation, right? So we need to make sure we do our planning and account a right solutions for these things because these are the things that's gonna pop up when you're in the deployment and then you'll be like, shoot, we didn't plan for this. Now we have to add more budget to the project to add a different solution to accommodate these things, right? And lastly, business continuity. If you have a failover arrangement for your current phone system in case you have an outage, what is that business continuity plan, right? How it is deployed, how it is uh, you know communicated to the users, what is the experience in business continuity situation, and then you need to plan for it. How does that replicate in the Microsoft Teams situation, right? Is it even needed? Most likely for your critical phone lines, yes, it will be a requirement. And then how do you plan for it? What are your options if there is an issue with Microsoft calling, for example, right? Like if that's a business critical situation, you need to account that into your planning exercise. Lastly, the user adoption strategy. Like I said in the beginning, right? Like user adoption is very important when it comes to rolling out any new technology. If the users are not trained properly, they don't know how to use the tool, they are not going to use it, right? As simple as that, which we want to avoid. So, what can we do with user adoption? There are training sessions, right? So when it comes to training, I have seen this a lot of times where we create a set of training guidelines or a recorded training in the beginning of the project, and that's it. We just kind of like distribute that. People don't really track if it is being watched or there is Q&A, things like that. So what we recommend is to do a pre-migration training to generate excitement. Like, hey, this is coming. This is going to be a new phone system. And then ongoing learning. As we are rolling out the technology, we need to keep on training that people can access to learn how to use technology. But with people's workload, they may not be able to join your training session, right? Based on whatever schedule you define. So we need flexibility. And with that comes the on-demand training. Record all the trainings, throw it on your OneDrive, SharePoint, right? Share links to the users who can go and watch it whenever they have time, whenever their calendar allows. And then plan for Q&A sessions. You can have a shared mailbox where people can submit their queries to, create a Microsoft Forms, right? If there is any feedback, to collect the feedback, send it to a shared mailbox that the project team can review and take necessary action on, right? So these things are, the point is not just pre-deployment, but ongoing and on-demand trainings are also very important. And then what kind of materials we deploy, user guide, FAQs. We want to try to make it as easy as possible, right? We don't want to send them a book of instructions. Try to keep it a page, right, with like graphical pictures and things like that. And then champions. So depending on the industry and the size of the company, right? Like there are champion program, which is essentially a tech savvy people within the users that we can designate as a champion. So they become their go-to people, right? And we need to make sure we also promote that, right? So recognition for the champions, we give them advanced training and tools so they can mitigate a lot of the issues at their level before it gets rolled up to the project team, right? And this will also make your project team very efficient by keeping those those questions to the champions. And recognition, right? Like I think everybody is extra motivated if there's a recognition. So if a champion is doing something awesome, let's recognize this, rewards, whatever we want to do to keep the motivation high. Lastly, I want to talk about what is Netrix doing to help clients in this situation, right? So we went through a lot of stuff, right? From a planning perspective, how is Netrix helping clients is by reviewing and assessing the network topology. It sometimes it becomes challenging. I'm just going to use challenging word, but to work with your networking peers or your security peers. So us being the industry expert for Teams phone deployment, we can come in with our recommendations. We have networking resource that can speak the networking language to understand what is happening, and we can relay the message to make sure the network topology is designed, has the right capacity, is optimized for cloud connectivity, and we can test it, right? So there are different tools that we use to run call simulations for 5 days, 7 days period on wireless and wired network to make sure there is not a particular day in the week that the networks are congested that we didn't account for, right? How are the remote users working? If you have the remote staff, how do they connect? How do they access 365? And then how can we optimize it? So we'll look at all those details and then create a plan together to make sure your remote workforce is using the most optimal connectivity. The same thing with wireless, right? There's if you're doing a wireless, your heat map, your QoS, your WMM settings, and things like that. And then the other thing, which is pretty important, is emergency calling, right? So now people are dynamic. People are always on the move. They're using different endpoints, their PCs, their laptops, their mobile phone, their desk phones. How do you plan for emergency calling, right? There are FCC guidelines for Carey's Law, Rebom Act, We have to route the calls with the location of the caller. At the same time, notify somebody in the company that somebody called 911, so they are aware if the public safety shows up at the front door, right? And somebody on the fourth floor called 911. We want to make sure those things are accounted for from a networking perspective, um, because that could potentially become a liability, right? So we can help plan all that. Bandwidth planning, testing your network, I already talked about, and then doing your voice assessment. We have future webinars coming that's going to focus, do a deep dive in the assessment design stuff, but we can help do an assessment of your voice environment. We have resources who are skilled in not only Microsoft, but other phone systems that you may have to help you understand where does those component fit in the Microsoft Teams world, right? Like, do you really need a contact center? We can use Queues app, you can use auto attendant, call queues, so on and so forth in the Microsoft world. And then we have a dedicated user adoption and training practice. And we have these people, their sole focus is to create content, training, train the user, train the trainer if you have your own training staff, just to make sure there's adequate amount of training and the right contents are created to drive the user adoption at the highest level, as well as we track it, right? So it's not, we have a continuous feedback loop from the end users that we keep feeding into our system to make sure our user adoption people are on top of adoption, right? Like if there is a lot of questions coming out, we accommodate for that. If the adoption is low, does it require more training, or do we need to do something else to get the user more excited? So that whole cycle is covered under that. So with that, we have, next upcoming webinar. So like I said, this is a webinar series we are starting. The next one is coming next month on the 20th. So be sure to sign up for that, where we are going to do a deep dive into evaluating your collaboration architecture and things to consider for in that area, to make sure you are set for success with the team's rollout. With that, we are at questions. Let's see if we have any questions in the all right. All right, so here's a question on QoS on how to segment the Microsoft traffic. So like I said earlier, right? So QoS is obviously only applicable on your managed network where you have control. The simplest way to explain QoS is it's like a freeway, right? So you have all these highways, the cars are running in different lane, and QoS is essentially like a carpool lane. So you can take a lane or traffic to take this carpool lane for expedite. You can go on a higher speed, you can get faster, there's less traffic in it. So the Q, there are different DSCP standards. The discretionary service code point is what is used to tag a traffic at the packet level, and your network devices look at this particular DSCP value on the network packet, and then they put it in the right queue for expedite delivery, assured delivery, so on and so forth, right? So typically, we would tag the audio traffic at the highest priority, video follows it, and then the screen sharing follows that. But it will be only applicable on your internal network. There is multiple ways you can apply QoS in your network. You can do it at a network level, where you tell your network devices that any traffic for this destination IPs and port, tag it with value 46, for example. uh, and then the network devices take care of it, right? The other way to do it is client tagging. So if you have a Windows PC, we can create a group policy and apply it to the PCs, telling it that, hey, the process is ms-teams.exe is the process on the PC, and if this process generates a traffic that is destined to Microsoft, IP port 50,000 and port 3478, tag it with 46 at the Windows level. So the client just tags it, the traffic goes on the network, and the network devices recognize it and they put it in the right queue, right? Um, there is a configuration to be done inside of your Microsoft Teams tenant as well to enable QoS, because by default audio, video, and screen sharing uses the same destination port, right? So when we enable QoS in your tenant, it separates the traffic by different destination port, right? So we have more granularity, and that's how we can put the different traffic in different priority queues in your network. Once the traffic hits the internet, the QoS is not applicable, but the idea is within your network, it will reprioritize, and then once it lands in the Microsoft network, there is no issues on that side, right? Um, and then I also recommend clients to make sure you're also tagging the return traffic, right? So from your network edge, anything coming in, you already know the IP ports. So make sure the reverse policy is in place to tag everything coming back into your organization so it's covered bi-directionally, right? uh, let's see. The other question is, does the Teams IP phones support QoS? Yes, they do. So they don't take the traffic, but they will respect the port configuration in your tenant, and they'll use a different IP port, and then your network will take it on from there. Let's see. Question on split VPN. So without going into details, right? So be sure to look at your vendor's documentation. Back when I did my first split VPN was in OCS 2007 R2 days, and there were not much documentation at the time. But now there is actually a pretty good, if you go and look up on the Microsoft Learn site, there is a how-to section from different vendors. So Cisco, Palo Alto, and others have their configuration note published there. Essentially, what we want to do is configure your VPN profile so that the traffic for Microsoft media ports are redirected out of the tunnel, right? So you can create in a Windows world, it would be a route, a route in your route table on the Windows to send those 52.x.x.x destination IP to use your local gateway versus sending the traffic on the VPN tunnel. So typically you push out a route to your remote PCs to send the traffic locally, and then optionally you could block it on your VPN tunnel, right? So you tell the tunnel not to take the media traffic. Your signaling traffic is generally fine. So if you are allowing your Teams client to register Microsoft through the tunnel, that's fine. But the media is where the critical component is, right? So we want to make sure the media gets pushed out of the tunnel, and the signaling is fine. Because if you have a conditional access deployed, um, which is based on the network segment, right? So we want to make sure those networks are allowed in your tenant to connect still. So good question on the VPN side, and this can be all tested, right? So when you have the split VPN configuration deployed on that remote PC, we can do a trace route, NS lookup, things like that, right, to see where the connection is going out using what gateway. Uh, so all these things can be easily verified, and we have done this for many customers. So ton of experience in that. We can definitely help you make sure everything is buttoned up and deployed properly. There is also a whole reporting side, right? So we have the QoS and CQD that we'll cover in the future webinar series. But yeah, I don't see any other questions. Feel free to reach out to us if you are interested in learning more on how Netflix can help. But otherwise, thank you for joining today, and we will see you in the next one. Thanks for your time.